Hello, and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And this is part three of my discussion about Discovery Season 1, Episode 8. And this is focusing on the mission on Pahvo. And the reason this got broken out is there was a lot of good and interesting stuff to say about the battle. That's why it got its own video. The stuff about the Klingons and Tilly Stamets, there was a couple of bits and pieces there that had to be spoken about. I thought were interesting, but they didn't really fit anywhere else. But the mission, the main substance of this episode, there is so much here that it really needed to be focused on as its own thing. Because at its heart, this is a great Star Trek sort of premise. They're exploring a new world. There's a new thing that they want to find out about. They're interested in it. There's a first contact situation. This is everything that a lot of the old Star Trek stuff was all about. It's really interesting. And yet, so much of how it's executed here is problematic. But let's talk about a couple of the good things before I get into why I have major problems with this. A couple of the good things. Number one, because they are doing this long trek across the planet, there is time and there is space in the narrative, both physically and temporally in terms of the time scale, for the characters to interact, for them to talk, to have conversation, to have these character moments. And this is something that I think is very important for all TV shows, but in particular science fiction, particularly space opera, where there is a tendency to try and jump from action sequence to action sequence, big battle to big battle, catastrophe to catastrophe. These quiet moments allow characters to actually develop, for their relationships to develop, for interactions to become interesting. And so I think it's vital for the narrative that these things happen. And I was really happy to see it here. Second thing, obviously, there's a first contact. This is really interesting. And their immediate reaction is not kill it with fire. Their immediate reaction is, oh, new life. Let's see what this is about. And again, I really like that spirit of what the Federation is meant to be, spirit of what Star Trek is meant to be about. These explorers, yes, they're at war, but they are still explorers at heart. This is their mission. This is their core mission, the whole point of Starfleet. So I really liked that. I thought it was great. And the fact that their mission is tied into the overall season narrative about the Klingon War, and that gives fuel for why they are there. I like that point of connectivity between the episode specific narrative, what they're doing on Pahvo, and tying it into the season narrative. So it was a nice acknowledgement that these things don't have to necessarily be bottle episodes, but you can actually tie them into the grander narrative. And all those are really good things. From a technical standpoint, flowing down into the scene on Pahvo, we're leaving Lorca and the Admiral discussing something, but their discussion continues as voiceover where they're talking about this mission, and the scene switches to Pahvo. We have that voiceover, so we know it's continuing. This is the point of connection. And then we see Burnham, Saru, and Tyler on the planet. And that is really, really well done. It gives the audience that transition, that connection. We're comfortable going, now we know where they are. Now we know what they're doing. And then this is where we start running into problems. Because for some reason, the showrunners then have Burnham institute a log. So we've just had one voiceover, so why not follow it up with a second one? And she reiterates the time frame, which I find annoying because we've literally just had it. But not only that, she tells us what the mission actually is. So there are two ways around this. If you need to dump exposition on your audience, and let's face it here, this is bald exposition dumping. There is nothing subtle about this. This is, let us tell the audience what the mission is. Number one, we just had a voiceover and a scene where Lorca is briefing the Admiral about the mission. He could have done it. That was the perfect narrative opportunity to do it. It was already established. He's telling the Admiral about this mission. Why not explain exactly what they're doing in the mission and then carry over to showing them on it? You already had that scene. You already filmed that scene. That's what that scene was about. Why not use it? Or if you didn't want to do that, have Tyler ask Burnham about it. Now, bear with me. Yes, Tyler would know kind of what the mission is. But part of what happens on this journey, in this episode, is Tyler and Burnham explore their relationship. So Tyler could very easily have said to Burnham as they're walking, "So Burnham, what's the actual thing that we're doing? I was only half listening during the briefing." And Burnham could roll her eyes or, launch into the scientific explanation about why what they are doing is important. And of course, later on, when they are being much more intimate and sharing confidences, Burnham could go, "You knew what the mission was." And he was like, "Well, yes, but how else was I going to flirt with you?" And it's because they're both kind of exploring this relationship between them and they're trying to find ways to do it and they're both unsure. You could easily work that in. And any gifted screenplay writer could do that a lot more subtly than I can. But it would fit with the narrative because you want to have them discussing things. Because as they're talking about that, then of course Saru can interrupt and you have that dynamic going on. It's there in the narrative already. Why not use that instead of wedging in an unnecessary and unwelcome and repetitive voiceover? Second thing about this, they say that they had to land or they had to beam down 30 kilometers away from the tower because the tower exuded an interference which didn't allow them to beam in closer. And there are a whole host of problems about this. Number one, I like that they tried to bring in a reason for why they couldn't beam in right next to the tower. I appreciate the effort, and usually when the narrative tries to meet you halfway, you just go with it. But here's my problem with this. At the end of the episode, they just beam directly out from next to the tower. Even though, okay, so the tower's on a slightly different frequency, but it's still interfering. It still has all of that power. And they talk about how the power of the tower is increased, but they can beam out really effectively. So why couldn't they beam in next to it? It's as if the excuse at the start was completely forgotten because, oh God, we just need them away from the tower now, so just beam them out. And the writers forgot that they couldn't beam in anywhere near it. Secondly, okay, so they can't beam in next to it. Haven't we had a whole load of scenes on Discovery Shuttle Bay? Did they only have the one shuttle that the Admiral was on? Is that it? They only had one shuttle and they never thought to go and get another one? Surely they have a second shuttle. Or if they didn't have a second shuttle, why, once that one had disappeared, wasn't that one of the first things they did was blink back, teleport back to Federation headquarters to requisition a new shuttle? Why couldn't they take a shuttle down? And it's a simple, tiny thing. But again, when you have a lot of these little things, they build up and ruin your suspension of disbelief. They undermine your faith in the narrative and in the reality being created. So let's think about another point that gets brought up. Burnham says they're 30 kilometers away, that they've been traveling for 18 hours, that Saru has been setting an accelerated pace, and yet they're still not at the tower. Now, the average hiking speed uphill for a human after a 3-second Google search is about 4 kilometers an hour. They're averaging just over 1 kilometer an hour. How is this an accelerated pace? Unless, of course, they're comparing it to the speed of sloths. There are a multiple number of ways that could be addressed, but you don't even have to address it because they could have said, it's a good thing we're out of that ravine. That ate up a lot of our time hacking through that jungle, or that detour took a lot of time. You didn't have to mention that they'd been walking for 18 hours in accelerated pace when they are ambling along in a well-maintained forest parkland. This is not an overgrown wild forest. This is a manicured, beautiful parkland that you could go jogging in quite comfortably. So again, they add in extraneous, unnecessary details that undermine your faith in the narrative. And it only really gets worse from here. Because let's leave the worst thing to the end, which is Saru. We'll talk very briefly. about the Pahvins themselves, the little tiny glowy dots. So, stepping outside of how the episode runs, as they're walking in the forest, they suddenly see this swarm of glowing motes floating around. For all intents and purposes, a swarm of fireflies. But they immediately go, oh, this is a sentient being based on nothing. Burnham scans it and says, I'm not getting any life signs. But we just take it on faith that this is a glowing sentient being of some kind. Saru, who is scared of everything, who fears everything, who's constantly in fear, immediately turns his rifle off, hands it to Tyler, and tells Tyler to point it at the ground. Which again raises questions. A, Tyler is a security specialist. Why hasn't he drawn his weapon and pointed at the thing? B, why was Saru the one armed and not Tyler? C, why is Saru feeling so comfortable? He's already said that he's on edge, and yet this thing magically appears and he's absolutely fine. And before you come back and say, oh, because he sensed it wasn't a predator because his little tendrily things didn't come out, that is the most inconsistent device that they have in the show. Because it just pops in and out randomly. It didn't react to Mud. It reacted to Burnham, even though Burnham is not a threat. So clearly it's not omniscient. It's not prescient. It's all based on what he thinks, and he's clearly useless. But we'll talk about Saru at the end. But anyway, so the Pahvins, this sentient entity, this cloud-like series of motes, we're told they're sentient. Oh, they want us to follow them. Based on what? The screenplay and the screenwriters obviously are not on the same page as the CGI team, because the CGI team have them basically just swirling around in place. They don't move, they don't indicate anything, they just float in place. So how are they meant to intimate that these things want them to follow them? The natural thing to do would have had them float away, stop, come back a wee bit, and then float away further. And Saru sort of look at it and go, it seems they want us to follow them. Tyler then follows this up with, but that direction is entirely different from the one that we're meant to be going to the tower. What direction? It hasn't moved. The cloud is stationary, it's hanging in midair, and then suddenly they're surrounded by all these other ones that have appeared out of nowhere. And you go, that doesn't seem benign, that seems sinister. But lo and behold, the crew just goes, yeah, everything's great, let's go. So now they follow the Pahvins. And here we run into something that gets contradicted again at the end. At the end, in order to get Tyler to the denouement, the Pahvins just magically teleport him. If the Pahvins have the ability to teleport the sentient beings walking around on their planet, why is there this whole follow us, walk along with us? Why didn't the Pahvins envelop them and teleport them somewhere? Because that would have made a hell of a lot more sense than this whole we're going to follow the will-o'-the-wisp through the forest routine. Then, after they follow the Pahvins, they get to a clearing. And in the clearing, there is a structure, a hut made of branches and things that have been interwoven, and there are cloth walls interwoven into this structure. Question number one. For a sentient being or beings that's a series of little tiny lights that have no physical presence, how did they pick up the sticks to make the walls? Number two, how did they weave the cloth to make the walls windproof? Number three, how did they guess the correct size and dimensions of a building necessary for solid sentient beings roughly the size of Saru, Burnham, and Tyler? Any person in their right mind who sees a bunch of glowing little lights in the forest, follows them, and it leads them to a mysterious man-made looking structure that looks perfectly the right size and therefore is completely out of place on an uninhabited planet, should be immediately suspicious about this thing. But no, Saru, the creature that is perennially afraid of absolutely everything. Tyler, the security officer who's paranoid and Burnham, the expert xenobiologist, all look at this and go, nah, that's perfectly normal. How do you get around that? Well, they could have ended up in a cave. Yes, cliched, yes, standard foam wall cave thing has been done a million times before. They could have ended up in a natural amphitheater. They could have ended up at an overhang or where there's a large crystal coming out of the ground and there was an overhang over there that they could rest under. But this crystal, the Pahvins keep floating in and out of. Something that looked like a natural occurrence rather than this man made structure that has no reason for being there. Then we get to the point of the narrative where Saru is talking to Tyler. Tyler's stalling him because Burnham has left. And Saru says, the Pahvins gave me something. And Saru turns around, walks to the edge of the hut, reaches down to the ground and picks up a glowing rock. And again, let's think about this logically. The Pahvins, no physical presence. How did they give him a glowing rock? Did they levitate it? Did we see this? Could this not have been added to show that the Pahvin swirled around it and the rock rose up into the air and then it floats out into Saru's hands? That would have explained all of this. But no, it's the Pahvins gave me this and it's a glowing rock. So there's a radioactive rock and the Pahvins gave it to him. And the first thing Saru did was he lobbed it over his shoulder and threw it on the ground next to the door because he hasn't been carrying it around. It wasn't on him. He wasn't carrying it. It wasn't in a pocket. It was literally lying on the ground in the hut next to Tyler and Burnham when Saru was elsewhere. Why include a line of dialogue and then include a direction of action, which is go and pick up a random bit of crap off the ground, but the dialogue doesn't support it? Simple way around this. Absolutely simple way around this that doesn't involve CGI, that doesn't involve showing any additional scene, is you change the dialogue to the Pahvins showed me something here. And he reaches down and picks up an ordinary rock off the ground and asks Tyler to put his hand on it. And he goes, feel the rock touching you. Do that sort of Zen meditation because Saru's now all Zen and at one with the planet in harmony. Lean into it. Have him do that. So Tyler actually starts doing that. And that's when Saru suddenly realizes that Tyler's been lying. You have exactly the same scene. But instead of having this ridiculous line of dialogue that doesn't match the action, and then even the action itself about a glowing rock doesn't make any sense, fine, it's done. I have no problem with this idea of harmony suddenly being a point of connection and revealing Tyler's hidden intentions. That makes perfect sense. I'm all on board with that. But how they went about it was just so dumb because it contradicts itself. So that's basically it about the Pahvins. So let's talk about the mission itself and my problem with the mission. So at the start, Burnham basically says that they've been sent down because this planet emits a sound. Everything on the planet emits a sound. And all of these sounds blend together in harmony. And this harmony somehow is being broadcast into space by the tower. And they want to study this to see if it can be adapted in some way to reveal cloaked Klingon ships. So this is not set in stone. They don't know whether or not this will work. This is studying something to see if it can be adapted. And you go, perfect. This is all about science. It's about exploration. It's about looking at the natural world and the wonder of the universe to see what it can teach us and what it can show us and how we can use that to learn things. I'm absolutely on board with this. But at the end, Lorca reacts like, you failed in your mission because it's not revealing the Klingon ships. The mission wasn't definitive and definite that they would be able to do this. They were going to study it to see if they could do this. And yet the end of the narrative ignores the start of the narrative. Because Lorca's attitude is, Burnham, you screwed up because this doesn't work. There was no guarantee that it was going to work. No one knew if it was going to work. It was a theory, and they were going to study it to see if it was possible. And we have the same thing about communications. Lorca says that they have to maintain radio silence in case the Klingons pick them up. But later on in the narrative, we're told that they can't contact Discovery because they're out of communications range. Well, number one, how do they know Discovery is out of communications range unless they tried to contact Discovery and couldn't? In which case, they violated their order to maintain communications blackout in case the Klingons discovered them. Number two, we've seen how communications seemingly have no limit in terms of range, depending on whether or not the narrative needs them to. Because people seem to be able to communicate over any distance whatsoever without any problem whatsoever if the narrative needs them to, and then can't. So it just feels like inconsistent world building. And there was no need for this. We've discovered the Pahvins. We're going to have to call Discovery. We can't do it until the rendezvous time because we can't risk the Klingons detecting us. That's the line you needed. Why say that the Discovery was out of communications range? How do they know that it's out of communications range? And before you say, oh, because Discovery was in that battle, they don't know that the Discovery jumped into a battle. The people on the planet have no idea they were in a communications blackout. They don't know where Discovery is. Discovery could be on the other side of the moon for all they know. But it's communications blackout. And then what we have is when we're first told about this mission, when we're told that they were going to investigate this to see whether they could adapt it to reveal cloaked Klingon ships, I thought, actually, that's a really cool idea. The idea that the sound on the planet creates some harmonic frequency or resonance, and then there's something about how it does this that goes into subspace or some sort of pseudo-scientific explanation. And therefore, what Discovery is going to do is they're going to understand the principle of this, and they're going to build a little module and then fit it on their ship. And so when they activate it, they'll be able to sort of send out this weird subspace sound, subspace sonar, because obviously sound doesn't work in space because space is a vacuum, and it would be stupid to suggest that sound would travel through space. But they would use a sort of subspace sonar, and that would give them an approximate location for the Klingon ships are on their sensors. But because they had to adapt it, because it's not perfect, because it's not planet-sized, it's going to be localized. So there's a limit on it. Or maybe it uses up a huge amount of power. So if they're using that, they then they can't use the jump drive at the same time, or the spore drive at the same time. You have these brilliant limitations that you can bring in that it's not going to immediately cancel the Klingon advantage, but it will mean that the Discovery will sometimes be able to see the ships and maybe sometimes not see the ships because they can't leave it running all the time, or it has a limited range. And you go, absolutely brilliant, because it reduces the massive imbalance of power that the Klingons currently have into something more equal, which means that the fights are more give and take. Really, really good idea. And then they can try to replicate it across the fleet, and that sort of balances it a little bit. I don't know, but I thought it was a really, really good idea. But no, it turns out what they wanted was to turn the planet into a giant radio antenna that was going to broadcast this signal across the galaxy. Apparently, the writers don't realize how big solar systems are, let alone how big the galaxy is, and how long it would take a signal to actually travel that far. Do they think the term light year is just some meaningless science fictional term? No, it's the distance light can travel in a year. And light, like all of the other forms of electromagnetic radiation, is traveling the fastest thing that we know. But obviously in Star Trek, they have warp, which allows them to circumvent that to some extent. But if the planet is beaming the signal out, it's essentially like beaming out radio waves. So it's going to take absolutely forever for these signals to travel through the galaxy. How is this a plan? How did anyone think this was a plan? And I know that Discovery has science advisors. Did the screenplay writers write this section while the science advisors were out of the room and they went, shh, don't tell them? because the idea of adapting it into a portable technology, this sort of space sonar, would work. But the idea that it was going to be a radio tower based on a planet, and therefore they would have to protect this planet because it would be the center of this sonar net that they're deploying, makes no sense whatsoever, because they're not talking about subspace waves that travel faster than the speed of light. They're talking about a frequency beamed out from a radio tower. And it's, again, it's taking something that could have been such a good idea and just making it stupid. But ultimately, my big problem with this episode is Saru. And Saru has become a character. I had initial issues with him, and it was grating and annoying. But, you know, Leonard Nimoy took, was it 3 episodes, 4 episodes to really nail what he was trying to do with Spock. And then Spock significantly developed over time. Shatner had Kirk down from day one. Bones as the folksy country doctor type, day one. But sometimes it takes a while to embed a character, to develop a character, to get across what they're trying to do with this character. And so I've tried to be forgiving. But Saru has become this massive thorn and irritant in the show. Saru complains that the planet has this constant noise, and because he has these super amazing enhanced senses, including sense of hearing, it's irritating him and constantly annoying him. Number one, if they were on a briefing about you're going to go to this planet where everything emits a sound, why didn't he bring noise cancelling headphones, ear protectors, earplugs, a pillow to tape around his head? Anything. Why did he go down and go, oh, actually, yeah, this sound is very annoying? And even when they beamed down and he went, oh, I can actually hear this, why didn't they radio up and say, Discovery, actually, you need to beam me down some ear protection straight away? But no, apparently no. He's just, even though he has super enhanced senses and this planet, everything emits noise, and it is therefore eminently foreseeable that this is going to be a problem, nah, it'll be absolutely fine. Number two, in addition to his enhanced senses, his super senses, he's also apparently super strong and super fast and has super stamina. If he turns out that he has super flight and super laser eyes, can you just paint an S on his chest and be done with it? This wouldn't be so bad if his strength, his stamina, his speed had been developed, hinted at, shown, acknowledged earlier on in the narrative. But it hasn't. This all just sort of comes out of nowhere. And it raises a couple of issues. Number one, if he is so strong, so fast, with enhanced senses, has ultimate stamina, why not fit him out with a suit of armor, Giorgio beam him over to the Klingon ship, and he could have just taken them all out in one go, because he could have just run through them with a big stick, beating them all on the head. Apparently he can run at 50 miles an hour. 50 miles an hour. And he's so strong he could kick someone across a room. Like, they wouldn't have stood a chance against him. Give him a spear, big pointy end on the end of it, and he could have just run through and stabbed them all. That would have ended the whole Klingon conflict then and there. So despite the fact suddenly finding this out creates that massive plot hole, number two, he's a prey species. The thing that preys on a super strong, super fast, super stamina, super agile creature must be absolutely monstrous. Because it's not like the Kelpians are just dumb beasts. They are sentient. They have the ability to make tools, even simple tools like a spear or a trap. They know how to talk. They could organize an ambush. If you can imagine, in a forest, 20 Kelpians, all armed with just spears, just wooden spears, and a modern day sort of platoon of our soldiers walking down, but these Kelpians can run at 50 miles an hour, and they are so strong they could probably hurl that spear right through 4 people all at once. It's not clear cut that the modern troops that we have with all of their modern technology and guns and armor plating and all of that sort of stuff would be able to fight them off. So whatever thing preys on them must be absolutely physically monstrous. Because even a technologically advanced species would find prey that strong and that agile difficult. So it's just, it creates this strange contradiction in Saru's character that now it just seems like they're throwing things onto it and it feels like a mess. But let's talk about his psychology. Like Saru keeps talking, and in this episode emphasizes he's always afraid. He fears everything. So they're walking along in a forest. These strange glowing blue lights appear in front of him, and his first reaction is, oh, this must be a sentient being, not run away, strange, weird things. And you go, oh, but his snake things didn't go off. Again, they're not the be all and end all because they're constantly bloody wrong in this show. So he sees these things, gives Tyler his gun. Tyler should have had his own gun and had his own gun pointed at them. They get surrounded, but Saru's like, no, it's going to be fine. And they enter this hut, which again, everyone should have been going, this is a bad idea. And the thing's floating in the middle of it. And Saru says, I'm a first contact specialist. We come in peace. Now, up until now, have they shown any indication that they can understand English or any language? No. Even later on says that Saru says, we haven't established a common vocabulary yet. You're like, right, so you still can't talk to them. So we come in peace, we mean you no harm, is not going to mean anything to them. And then what does Saru do? This expert in first contact relations, this expert in exploring strange alien worlds, this expert who knows strange aliens that don't exhibit life signs. This is something very, very weird and you should perhaps be careful about. He sticks his bare hand right into the middle of it. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently, the first contact protocol is, hello, we mean no harm. Now have a good fisting. I was really hoping that these aliens would actually turn out to be energy sucking parasites, and him sticking his bare arm into the middle of them would result in him dying, being turned into a lifeless husk twitching on the ground. But no, apparently, a good fisting, that's all that they wanted. And thinking about it, if you think of all of those alien abduction stories that we hear about, where they constantly go on with about anal probing, maybe it is a universal greeting. But you just have to think, why did the writers put that in? Why, when the actor saw that script, did they go, are you sure? Why, when the director saw this, they went, you know what would be a good idea? Just slam your whole arm into them. And then ultimately, we have Saru and Burnham having this whole fight on the beach. And again, this is a moment, I keep saying this, there are all of these moments that we've had throughout almost every single episode where Saru and Burnham have a confrontation. And Saru keeps saying these things about Burnham. He has this vision or picture of her where he's assessed her character. And we, the audience, know that he is mistaken. Burnham knows that he is mistaken. Burnham, her character arc is all about embracing being human, about a new start, about doing all of these things. And yet, here, once again, we have yet another confrontation between Saru and Burnham, and it is not used as an opportunity by Burnham to finally confront Saru and say, you are wrong. You have misunderstood these things. You have misjudged me. This, what you think is not what happened, and correct Saru. And Saru then would have that opportunity to go, maybe I have been wrong. I will have to rethink this. What if other things that I have thought have been wrong? A moment of introspection, a moment for character growth, a moment to reboot his relationship with Burnham. And the reason I am getting irritated about this, and in this instance in particular, angry about it, is at the end of this episode, Burnham goes up with the tearful eyes going, Saru, look at me. This is all about that moment when Saru has to reevaluate things. So why not use that confrontation to do that instead of just having a fight where he kicks her 20 feet away, where she has to stun him twice, where he goes Kong smash or Hulk smash and smashes up the bit of tech that's on the thing on the tower. It's just another missed opportunity. And everyone goes, oh, but they still have that moment. You go, but the moment isn't earned in the medical bay. It doesn't fit naturally in the medical bay. It is fitted naturally at all of these other points. And if that's where the writers wanted to go, why not use these natural fracture points, these points of confrontation where it would be natural for Burnham to say, I have had enough, Saru. You keep saying this about me, but it's not true. I didn't betray Giorgio. I tried to save her. I didn't betray the ship. I tried to save it. I didn't betray you. I tried to save you. She could have thrown all of that back in his face. And Saru could have initially disbelieved her. He could have been annoyed. You're just trying to shift blame. She goes, no, this is the truth, blah, blah, blah. And then he has to rethink it. He has to think about how he has been projecting his own guilt, his own shame, his own anger all onto Burnham. To actually get across a genuine character moment. So I liked that this episode tried. I liked that it was about exploration. I liked how it was meeting an alien and not immediately getting into a fight with it. I like how it was an alien that wasn't just another humanoid with a weird forehead. I liked all of those aspects. I liked that they gave Burnham and Tyler room to develop and navigate a relationship and friendship. I liked that there was interaction between Burnham and Saru. I liked that it gave Saru some depth of character, talking about his constant fear and how he was suddenly free of it. All of these were really good things. And all of them were absolutely and completely undermined by mistakes made between the beginning of the mission and the end of the mission, undermining very simple things, very straightforward things. Little tiny changes to the dialogue could have sorted out so much of it. So that's my frustration with this particular part of the episode. And that's why I wanted to leave it on its own, because there was so much good going on in this episode. But ultimately, this is where we had some steps forward there with the previous episodes, and this feels like a massive step back. And I was so disappointed. But anyway, I hope this has been of interest. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.